Welcome to another episode of Battlefield 4 Hardcore Meta, a series covering all Battlefield 4 primary and sidearm weapons in a specifically hardcore context. In this episode, we are covering the three assault rifles that set themselves apart due to their burst fire mechanics: the AN-94, M16A4, and AK-12 assault rifles, as well as covering a few things unique to the assault class itself. First, let's go over how to unlock them. The AK-12 is the default assault rifle. You have access to it immediately. The AN-94 is similar in that technically you effectively have it by default. You simply have to open the battle pack from the weapons crate pack that everyone gets. The M16A4, however, requires you to get 59,000 experience using assault rifles, making it the penultimate assault rifle unlocked through normal weapon class progression. Now let's look at the common traits between these three rifles. Much like the vast majority of assault rifles, these three guns have 30 shots plus 1 to a magazine. And owing to an identical damage model, all of them have the same kill capacity of 10 1/3 kills. This is standard and the median capacity for this class of weapon. They also have the standard deploy time of 0.67 seconds. This is actually the fastest available for assault rifles. But as a stat, this loses its luster when you consider that there are only 6 assault rifles with slower deploy times, making it meta-wise unimpressive. Still, it's one less worry and will make switching back to your primary less of a hassle. These guns also have the same minimum spread value of 0.2. This is the lowest base value available for full autos, making them generally accurate for stationary shots. They also have the same aiming move penalty of 0.8 and aimed move speed of 50%, which results in technically more accurate effective moving aimed spread of 0.6 compared to the bullpups in the assault rifle class. Even though the penalty listed is worse, the slower movement speed results in better shot groups. Shots while moving and aiming, however, still aren't generally suggested, as moving that slow doesn't really make you any harder to hit, so the decrease in accuracy very much is not worth it. They also have the same hipfire cone of 3.5, standard for non-bullpup conventional front-load assault rifles. This is below average as compared to all full autos, but it's not so bad that it could be really called an outright weakness. It's an adequate stat. What is not the same between the three is their effective hipfire performance, which varies due to differing rates of fire. Their recoil decrease is exactly the same, of 18. All the standard 5.56 assault rifles get this value. And in fact, in the full auto meta, this is flat average. These weapons are actually really unified by one primary thing. But with the title of this episode, you can probably guess. They either can only fire in burst mode or semi-auto in the case of the M16A4, or their burst fire mode is uniquely effective due to a boost in RPM. This isn't a stat per se, but it is something that is consistent across the three guns. They should be used in burst fire. However, this makes it so that they tend to require a fairly specific playstyle that makes them more restricted to mid-range than other full auto assault rifles, as burst has its limitations in terms of performance in close range or long range. Having to interrupt your firing or having your gun jam due to BF4's burst mechanics can leave you very vulnerable in close range. The somewhat ammo-wasting nature of firing multiple bursts to ensure your target goes down also can create ammo reliability issues, further penalizing close-range combat scenarios. And while burst mode comes with the benefit of transferring the first shot recoil multiplier to the final shot in a burst, making your shots more accurate as a group, if you need more shots to finish a target, you will have to contend with a very uneven recoil pattern that can make staying on target fairly difficult at longer ranges. You can't tap fire fewer shots on the fly than what the burst produces to adapt for an even longer ranged shot. Hence, these weapons really function best near the edge of the damage model where you can get a one burst kill, and you should avoid combat farther out or in very close ranges. That brings up the last stat, the damage model, which is shared between all three of these guns. It is the standard low damage model for assault rifles, but this is a damage model shared by all but 2 of the assault rifles, making it a stat that doesn't mean too much in the weapon class. With 3 shots anywhere to the body, these guns achieve kills out to 34 meters. If you manage to land nothing but chest shots, you can get a kill out to 45 meters. If you manage a headshot and a chest shot, you can get a kill out to 51 meters. With 4 shots anywhere to the body, or with 2 headshots, you can manage a kill as long as the projectile is still flying. Not only is this standard for assault rifles, this damage model is generally in the middle of the full auto meta. The next area we will be covering is the similar stats. There is 2, but they are related in a way that almost makes them just one. Effective first shot up recoil and up recoil for all 3 of these guns is generally fairly similar, resulting in a fairly consistent feeling between the AK-12 and M16A4 in terms of controllability. The one major thing, of course, is that since you will mostly be using burst fire, the effective upwards first shot recoil only affects follow-up bursts. This means the standard recoil is almost more important in this case. The M16A4 has the best of the 3 with an upward recoil of 0.28, giving it the most accurate burst in terms of vertical recoil by a small margin, and is better than average for assault rifles. The AK-12 is only a nudge higher with 0.3, which is still a hair better than average, and the AN-94 moves one additional nudge worse with its 0.32, placing it precisely at the median recoil for assault rifles. The AK-12 has the lowest first shot multiplier value of 2.1, combined with the middling overall upwards recoil gives it an effective first shot / post burst recoil of 0.63, the lowest recoil in between bursts, making follow-up bursts slightly easier to keep on target for the AK-12. Meanwhile, the M16A4's slightly more hefty multiplier of 2.3 brings its post-burst recoil to 0.644. This is still manageable and slightly better than average. The AN-94's multiplier is the same as the AK-12 at 2.1, resulting in a post-burst recoil that makes its first shot recoil / post-burst recoil a flatly average assault rifle value of 0.672. Something to keep in mind is that burst is generally less effective against targets using cover than full auto or semi-auto weapons due to the jamming effects and lack of a reactive adjustment to firing rate. Next, what we will cover is the major differences. Probably the most important area of difference is the RPM, as this directly affects how the burst mechanics play out, and in the case of 2 of the rifles, also affects how valuable the full auto setting is for the AN-94 and AK-12, something the M16A4 lacks entirely. First, let's take a look at the M16A4. The M16A4 is the more simple weapon to cover, as it lacks a full auto firing mode entirely. Each burst fires at a rate of 800 rounds a minute, which is a great rate of fire. Only 3 other assault rifles fire faster than this, and if you are within the 3-hit kill range, you can take someone down in a single rapid burst. Follow-up bursts are, however, going to have some severe limitations, as you will have to start contending with the recoil multiplier and effects of burst delay. To take the most advantage of the M16A4, you will need to make sure you land those first 3 shots. The AK-12 is a bit more flexible. The AK-12 does have a full auto firing mode, and while its RPM is not the worst firing rate, it's fairly terrible at 650 rounds per minute. This is fast enough for fringe situations where full auto is specifically desirable, like pre-firing in close range or dealing with cover-heavy areas, but generally speaking, you should use the burst mode. The burst mode on the weapon fires at a solid 750 rounds per minute, placing its in-burst RPM on par with favorites like the M416 and L86A2. It's not an amazing RPM, but it's a little better than average. The AN-94, however, is a bit more special. See, its full auto firing rate is the worst possible for assault rifles, at 600 rounds per minute. However, when switched to burst fire, the weapon fires a 2-round burst at a blazingly fast rate of 1200 rounds a minute. As a result, you should not really ever use the full auto firing mode. Its burst mode turns the gun into basically a more nimble firing DMR, with better hipfire performance and more leeway for the player's accuracy, since it effectively fires 2 shots instead of just 1 high damaging one. A quick note on this very series that demonstrates how precise this gun is. When I was deciding on what guns to cover, I almost thought I should put this in a future precision assault rifle video instead of the burst fire video. Ultimately though, it still plays out as a burst assault rifle first and foremost, and since it's a gun you get immediately along with the AK-12, it made sense to cover it sooner rather than later. Anyways, overall hipfire performance is made different between the 3 due to these 3 RPM differences. The AN-94 technically has the worst hipfire performance of all assault rifles when fired in full auto, but since its burst fire is noticeably faster, even when accounting for delay, you improve its hipfire to being better, though still fairly poor. The AK-12 unfortunately has the second worst overall hit performance and doesn't escape this position, regardless of firing mode. In general, you should avoid getting into close-range fights when using the AK-12. Finally, the M16A4 has a slightly better than average hipfire performance, having a good RPM to make up for the somewhat wide hipfire cone these three guns have. Muzzle velocity is another stat that largely separates these guns. The M16A4 gets a very fast velocity of 650 meters per second. Among assault rifles, this puts it in a three-way tie for second place. This makes it among the better assault rifles for hitting dodging opponents, and can notably mitigate burst fire's typical weakness when it comes to handling cover-heavy areas of a map. The AN-94 comes in next for these three, and it has a middle-of-the-road assault rifle velocity of 620 meters a second. This is more than enough for long-range shots that the AN-94 mostly exists for. The AK-12 is the weakest in this regard, with a 600 meter a second velocity. This is still not terrible, it's just slightly below mediocre for assault rifles, which generally have solid velocities. But it gives the user another reason to switch to full auto in the context of areas with more cover. Reload speeds and the resulting ammo reliability also tends to vary fairly significantly, despite the standard kill capacity all three have. The M16A4 has the best ammo reliability of any assault rifle due to its best-in-class reload times. It not only has the fastest assault rifle reloads for both tactical, 1.8 seconds, and empty at 2.37 seconds, it has the fastest tactical reload of any full auto primary in the game. This gives the M16A4 a fantastic uptime, despite the limitations of burst fire, which can actually make reload management a tad more difficult, as you are bound to waste a little extra ammo, since each trigger pull comes with a guarantee of 3 bullets being sent down range. The AK-12 is overall pretty middle of the pack for ammo reliability. With a tactical of 2.3 seconds and an empty of 3.2 seconds, you shouldn't need to fret too much about topping off your magazine, as the empty isn't particularly punishing, which is good due to the aforementioned issues for managing reload timing with burst firing. The AN-94 has the weakest overall ammo reliability of the three, but it's overall only slightly below average for assault rifles. And due to its 2-round bursts, counting your shots is actually a little more intuitive. With a tactical of 2.4 seconds and an empty of 3.5 seconds, you will generally want to avoid the longer reload. It's not terribly punitive, but it's enough of an issue that you should get a bit more out of the gun by reloading consistently before you have a dry magazine. Spread bloom and fade stats also vary a decent amount. Here the AN-94 shares the assault rifle crown with the SAR-21, having both the lowest spread increase per shot value of 0.078 and fastest spread decrease of 17.3 per second unfired. Generally speaking, rapid firing of the 2-round burst will stay completely accurate, as the burst delay will prevent accumulation of any bloom burst to burst. Not too far behind, the AK-12 has a fairly strong, consistent accuracy with a spread increase of 0.084 per shot, and that bloom fades every second unfired at a rate of 14.7. This makes doing immediate follow-up bursts relatively unpunishing in terms of bloom, and allows a relatively accurate grouping for all 3 shots. This, however, is where the M16A4 is the weakest, with a spread increase of 0.104 per shot and a decrease of 9.7. You will take a significant hit to your accuracy if you spam your bursts one after another, and in general, each burst of 3 will be noticeably less accurate compared to the AK-12s. If you are trying to land shots at the edge of the M16A4's 3-shot kill reach, pacing your bursts is likely the better choice if you don't get a 1-burst kill at the outset. Horizontal recoil also varies significantly across all 3 of these rifles. Here the AN-94 takes the top spot for assault rifles in terms of overall horizontal recoil. With a leftward pull of 0.1 and rightward of 0.12, the weapon's recoil is mostly upward, making the second shot in a 2-shot burst generally fairly precise and consistent. While not perfectly even in both directions, the slight additional strength of the right pull is not particularly noticeable in terms of impact on a burst's accuracy. The AK-12 comes in second, with a similarly solid, low overall horizontal recoil. Unfortunately, it is a more lopsided recoil of 0.17 left and 0.12 right. This can make the recoil move fairly solidly to the left. Coming in with a 0.17 left and a 0.28 right, the M16A4 has the worst of the three in terms of side-to-side recoil. This, coupled with its higher bloom, restricts the M16A4 to middle ranges and closer. Next, let's cover the barrel and grip suggestions. For the AK-12 and M16A4, your barrel choice depends on the environment. Lots of chest-high cover and verticality make the muzzle brake worthwhile, as the recoil and spreads effect on the burst will give you a less vertical grouping of shots, allowing you to land shots on targets peeking over cover or from rooftops more effectively. In situations where you expect your target to be exposed to you, however, due to a mostly flat and open environment, the heavy barrel is the better choice. In both cases, you should go for a stubby/potato grip, as you want to minimize the second and third shot spread as much as possible to improve the consistency of landing one burst kills. I don't suggest the ergo/vertical grip, as I strongly advise against moving and firing for these guns. And I don't suggest the angled/folding grip, as it only makes follow-up bursts easier to control. Both of these choices would also be at the expense of an individual burst's accuracy that you'd get with the stubby/potato grip, increasing the likelihood of needing multiple bursts. That said, the M16A4 might be the single best assault rifle for bipoded shooting, as doing so would mitigate being forced to deal with burst jamming, as you'll generally stay longer distances away from your targets, while also being viable despite its assault rifle-sized magazine, as its reloads are so quick, which will generally give you a solid uptime. This also takes advantage of the M16A4's fast velocity and high rate of fire as a burst weapon, and mitigates the need for a longer ranged sidearm. Much like the Support's U100 with a bipod, this turns it into a defensive DMR-style weapon. I would not suggest this build for typical M16A4 use, but it is a viable option if you are interested in that type of playstyle. For the AN94 though, the muzzle brake with an angled grip is a strong choice for it regardless of environment. You want to minimize the overall recoil, as multiple bursts are always needed to kill a target at full health, meaning that even if the recoil multiplier only affects the final shots of the two-shot burst, you are going to have to pull the trigger a second time, even if both shots landed, barring the effects of headshots. For sights and accessories, the M16A4 should simply get a red dot sight or a one-time sight, coupled with a laser. The M16A4 is not really all that amazing for longer range shooting with the standard build, and you want to try to mitigate the drawbacks from the effects of burst jamming in hipfire situations as much as possible by making sure your first shots land. A laser sight can help with that. The AK-12 is a tad more accurate, and you can likely get away with a 3.4 times scope and laser sight to cover for sudden close range encounters. However, if the 3.4 times seems like too intense of a zoom level, a red dot with a 2 times magnifier can also work. Just keep in mind the magnifier is somewhat clunky to adjust and results in a fairly bulky sight. Foregoing the laser, of course, is also always a risk, as you will have generally worse hipfire performance. The AN94 should get a 4 times scope and laser sight. Being that it performs roughly like a DMR and 2 bursts can potentially kill a target at any range, the additional zoom can be greatly helpful. And the laser sight, of course, much like with the AK-12, can greatly assist in improving sudden close range situations. Each of the assault rifles here should get a different sidearm. The M16A4 would generally benefit from a longer range sidearm like the Mare's Leg to make up for its worse overall longer range. It doesn't really have much in the way of needing an emergency backup due to its fantastic ammo reliability, and it performs admirably in close range. The AK-12, on the other hand, is a bit more open in terms of its sidearm choice. Its ammo reliability is mediocre, and its long range and close range performances are both just adequate, so what sidearm you choose will be more dependent on the map you choose to use the gun in, and what gadgets you pair with it. That said, you probably want to pick something with a fast draw, but don't want to pick something that is completely redundant in terms of ranged effectiveness. The 44 Magnum has a reasonably fast draw and can help cover for longer ranges to a moderate degree, but I'd only use it if you don't also select the M26 Slug as a gadget. The Compact 45 and Shorty 12G both have the fastest available deploy time and are probably some of the best close range options available to you that have a fast draw. Seeing as the assault class can have a shotgun as a gadget, however, if you do pick one of those, the Shorty 12G becomes redundant. For the AN94, a sidearm that can work pretty well in closer ranges makes the most sense. While its ammo reliability is overall worse than the other two numerically, it generally is easier to manage due to its accuracy, and a fast swap isn't extremely important. You could get away with using the G18 if you just want a hail of bullets, the 93R if you want a faster deploy time and better accuracy, or the Shorty 12G if you aren't running a shotgun gadget, don't plan on swimming, and want to be able to very quickly pull out a close-range dominator. For gadgets, I generally advise a first aid pack for really any and all assault class builds. Being able to heal and then go immediately on the move is generally important for objective-oriented play. However, the AN94 is among the few options that can go for the stationary and more passive healing option that the medic bag provides, as you won't have to constantly throw a new medic pack down, as it'll instantly begin healing you as long as you are within its healing range. If you really want to maximize your survivability, selecting both will enable you to stack healing of both gadgets. Keep in mind, despite some of the footage you might see of me throwing down multiple packs, multiple med packs or multiple med bags do not stack on themselves. However, you do get a stacking effect when you combine med packs and medic bags with each other, doubling your healing rate. Your second gadget, however, really ought to be the defibrillator on maps with vehicles. The assault class in BF4 can't really combat vehicles and is mostly an anti-infantry class. This makes keeping the other three classes alive extra important, as the other three classes oftentimes will have effective anti-vehicle equipment, especially engineers. In general, you should sort of play like a bodyguard for the other classes to better enable them to do anti-vehicle work by aggressively clearing out infantry as well as healing and reviving teammates. That said, in maps that have transport vehicles but no main battle tanks, the M320HE makes for a decent way to take out infantry at mid-range or when they hide behind cover, damage transport vehicles, as well as a way to deal chip damage to IFVs. I would generally not advise going for the second shot against an IFV immediately, however, as the moment they're made aware of you, they'll likely wipe you out in a split second, unless you stay in cover. Keep in mind, the infantry grenade launchers can be used while riding in transport vehicles, like on the sides of transport helis or on the passenger seat of quad bikes, jeeps, buggies, boats, and hovercraft. And for this specific situation, you can take advantage of this somewhat more with the 3GL. The 3GL is the only other launcher the Assault has that can deal damage to vehicles, while its damage output is overall only about 2/3 of the standard HE per reload. The 3GL's ability to pepper 3 shots increases your chances of landing a hit, something that's particularly useful if you are firing from a moving vehicle. It also makes tracking your shot's arc easier, making adjusting your aim for the follow-ups much easier. A quick note, you can do this with the support class's XM25 airburst grenade as well. I forgot to make the suggestion in the first support class video. And of course, the ability to fire 3 separate shots makes it a little more usable against the infantry. Just note, for a one-shot kill, you'll need to land a direct hit. You can get a kill with 2 splash damage hits, however. In maps where you will only be engaging with infantry, the Assault class has access to a plethora of options that can do excellent work at specific ranges and situations. Starting with the M320's non-HE lethal variants, its dart variant is basically an extremely powerful shotgun with a long reach, verging on being more of a mid-range weapon. Its main drawback, of course, being needing to be reloaded after each shot, and the other issue being that you often won't have much ammo for it, depending on whether you have a field upgrade unlocked that increases your 40mm ammunition. This makes it the rare shotgun that actually benefits from cover more than it's hindered, as you'll want cover available for when you need to reload. It can also act semi-decently as a finisher for mid-range if your target is still out in the open and you empty your primary's magazine, but I wouldn't say it fulfills the needs of these particular burst assault rifles. If you are looking more for a way to deal death to targets hiding behind cover, the LVG variant is a anti-personnel grenade that bounces off walls before exploding. It generally has a wider lethal range against infantry, but deals no damage to armor. This is a favorite for pushing in all infantry maps with choke points, as you will be able to wipe out entire squads, potentially clearing your path to a capture point. This likely would pair decently with the M16A4. The M320 also has a few non-lethal options with specific tactical uses in infantry-only modes or maps. The M320 Smoke can launch a smoke grenade out to some pretty long distances. That can be useful if you want to specifically block the view of a distant attacker, assuming the attacker doesn't have an easy way of simply walking around your smoke for a new angle. It also can be used as a means of having access to smoke while otherwise equipped with lethal hand grenades, or as a means to allow additional smoke placement in addition to a hand-thrown smoke grenade if you want to just cover a huge area with smoke cover. This is generally better in more wide open areas where you can take advantage of the range in which you can fire the smokes. The smoke launcher could come in some use with the M16A4 or AK-12. The flashbang variant serves a similar purpose, only instead of making a specific location obscured, you blind your opponents. The effectiveness of the flashbangs in BF4 is somewhat questionable. The blinding effect only lasts about 4 to 5 seconds at the best of times, and the targets have to not have their backs to the flashbang when it goes off. If you do use these, you should use a weapon that you can aggressively charge in with immediately after shooting one, making the longer range firing of the flashbang launcher sort of pointless. The range of the blinding effect isn't very impressive, at best maybe a radius of a typical explosive anyway. The real benefit with flashbangs is that you get more of them than a standard explosive, making them a little more spammable. Because of their limited range and the time it actually blinds people being fairly short, you should also only use them indoors, where you expect a cluster of enemies to be. A side benefit of them is that it also causes targets to fire in reaction oftentimes once blinded, in hopes of killing you. Once the blinding fades, however, players still won't see their friendly indicators over their teammates, which in hardcore means you can cause some friendly fire deaths, and then firing reactively gives their position away on the map. Just be careful not to blind yourself or teammates. I wouldn't suggest using this for any of the burst assault rifles, as rushing in aggressively generally isn't the strength of these weapons. Then there are the M26 and its variants. The mass variant being the standard shotgun. This is probably one of the more useful infantry killing gadgets, and it can make up for longer ranged focused weaponry exceptionally well. It's not as effective as a primary shotgun, of course, but as a way to make up ranged effectiveness gaps in your loadout, it's excellent. The dart version performs mostly the same, but trades raw damage for better velocity and more consistency in case you run up against the occasional defensive field upgrade, which dampens the effectiveness of buckshot the most. I'd use the mass variant for very close range and switch to the dart if you think you'll be encountering close to mid-range targets. This would likely go well with the AN-94. The slug variant is largely the opposite. It works almost like a pocket sniper, much like the 44 Magnum and Mare's Leg, except it has a lower velocity and a one-hit kill potential up to mid-range, like the primary shotgun slugs, mostly useful when used with the M16A4. The M26 Frag is a variant that fires anti-personnel explosive rounds. They deal no damage to vehicles of any kind, but can deal damage to infantry hiding behind cover, making it specifically good in maps where cover is abundant. In maps where transport vehicles are present, they can function as an anti-infantry only mini grenade launcher, as the area of effect damage makes it a little easier to land hits while in a moving vehicle. Seeing as burst assault rifles can have issues dealing with cover, the M26 Frag is not a bad option for any of these for instances where cover is abundant. For grenades, I suggest either the M34 Incendiary or smoke grenades. The smoke grenades are an obvious choice in this case, as it'll allow you to protect yourself from being spotted while you go for revives, as well as a way to keep vehicles from seeing you. Incendiary acts essentially as a hybrid smoke and lethal. You can use it to harm enemies, and it'll provide at least a small amount of smoke even after the fire burns itself out. It also works decently well for range control, as the fire can prevent close-range specialist rushers from reaching you, at least for a few seconds, while you switch to a close-ranged sidearm or gadget. In smaller maps without vehicles where revives are less important, you might want to consider hand flares as a defender in an indoor location. Throw the hand flares behind your defensive position so they don't also blind you. If enemies rush the point you are defending, their ability to spot you will be significantly worse, and you will be afforded more time to land a one-burst kill. If you are playing in an infantry-only map and you are an attacker, burst weapons are a poor choice in the first place, but the RGO impact should help mitigate burst assault rifle weaknesses. In terms of field upgrades, the Combat Medic field upgrade is probably the best overall for medics playing in larger vehicle maps. With the first benefit, the medkit upgrade, being able to place down more health items right away can be a nice boon, especially with the health packs I recommend, as you can only heal one player at a time with each pack. The next immediate upgrade, Sprint, improves your ability to reach friendlies so you can heal them or revive them, and of course has the general use of reaching cover and objectives faster. It also makes you a bit harder of a target to hit for snipers. The second to last benefit, Defib upgrade, is probably the most beneficial. Having the time it takes to fully charge your defibrillator will significantly improve your ability to keep friendlies up while placing yourself at much less risk. The final upgrade is primarily useful if you find yourself in a vehicle with external manned guns. As an example, you'll be able to heal your side gunners while piloting a transport helicopter, though this can also be achieved somewhat if you place a medic bag on the vehicle, though in that case the medic bag can be destroyed by enemies. The Grenadier field upgrade is generally a better choice in infantry-focused maps where you won't be using defibrillators. This will give you additional hand grenades immediately, a very strong boost to your effectiveness in pushing to an objective. The same applies to the second upgrade, Sprint, which can help you obtain flanks on your enemies or simply reach an objective before they can. The 40mm grenade ammunition upgrade also significantly improves your abilities for pushing even more. And the flak upgrade improves your survivability against any explosives, which is always beneficial in infantry maps where explosives tend to get spammed. Now for general tactics for these three rifles. In general, I'd aim for center of mass with burst weapons, but in a way where the recoil naturally guides your final shot to roughly where your target's head is going to be. As stated before, you don't need to fret too much about running your M16A4 and AK-12's magazine until dry. The empty reload penalty is not notably harsh in either case. However, you should count the bursts on the AN-94 and try to reload before it's empty. With the assault class, regardless of weapon choice, it's generally beneficial to stick around other friendly teammates so you can heal or revive them. In general, due to the nature of bursts and the jamming mechanic, I strongly advise you never pre-fire these weapons. More than likely, they'll simply jam on you at the most inconvenient moment, causing an easily preventable death. Wait until you have a visual on your target, and preferably a clear one, not obscured by cover. As for general ranged engagements, the M16 generally works well in mid-range and is still decent closer up. The AK-12 works well in mostly just mid-range, but is mildly competent at close and long ranges, and the AN-94 is generally best at long ranges, but still fairly good at mid-range as well. The M16A4 and AK-12 are primarily defensive weaponry, generally good at locking down specific locations that provide advantageous layouts for these rifles. The AN-94 is actually okay for aggressive play, as long as you try to stick to longer ranges in general. As for the best way to use these rifles, stationary fire is the best way to go. The weapons do not function well when fired on the move. Even hipfire will generally suffer due to the restrictions that bursting places on you. You want all of your shots to land, otherwise your time to kill will suffer significantly. In conclusion, these rifles are best for when you want an assault rifle that not only favors middle ranges, but actually specializes in mid-range combat overall. If you are good at tightly controlling that variable, these rifles will provide fairly strong performance as a defender or intermediate marksman. If you want to be informed of future video releases by me, please consider subscribing and clicking the bell for notifications. Also consider liking the video if you enjoyed it. If there is something I missed, or you think I got wrong, or if you just want to contribute to discussion, please feel free to comment as well.